The year is 1917. Europe has erupted into anarchy amidst the First World War. The major allies, Britain, France, and Russia, are locked in a stalemate with the Central Powers of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All that is needed is a major uprising among these powers in order to tip the scales, and that uprising came in the form of the Great October Socialist Revolution. Its location, the massive Tsar-led empire of Russia.
Debout les dames de la terre, debout les forçats de la femme, la raison commence au cratère, c'est l'éruption de la femme. Du passé, faisons table rase, sous l'esclave.
The Great October Revolution of 1917 was one of the single most astounding feats ever accomplished by a lower level of society in modern history. To the world at the time, even the idea of peasants and workers seizing control in any country was laughable, let alone it happening in the largest country in the world. However, before diving into the murky waters of the revolution, one must first travel back nearly 70 years ago to a man who was just completing, unbeknownst to him, the most influential document of his time. The man's name? Karl Marx. Philosopher, social scientist, historian, revolutionary. Karl Marx was by far the most influential economic thinker of the 19th century. A well-respected lawyer, Marx joined the Communist League in 1844. The League was an order that wanted to help rid Russia of their corrupt capitalist party. In 1848, Marx composed the Communist Manifesto, a pamphlet outlining the political ideals of the Communist Party, such as the abolishment of private ownership of property and means of production, political and social equality, and equal distribution of wealth. The manifesto was to communists as the Bible is to Christians.
The image that people have today in the West of communism is rather different from the image that they had at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Because today we think of communism when we think of the states of China, the former Soviet Union, Cuba, for example. So what we really think of as state communism. But in 1917, communism was seen as a revolutionary force, not of a state, but coming from the working classes, coming from the lower classes of society who were desirous of improving their lot in society and overturning the hierarchical order that governed them.
The manifesto was the doctrine for all those living under communist rule. The manifesto did not come to fame until the Communist Party came to rise in the early 1900s. The man responsible for this rise in popularity was also the future dictator of Communist Russia, Vladimir Lenin. Although a successful revolution requires the support of the people in order to succeed, one man is often the instigator. In this case, that man was Vladimir Lenin, an inspiring leader who urged Russia to rebel against their capitalist rulers. The leader of the Bolsheviks, or revolutionaries, Lenin took the reins of the revolution in 1917. Lenin's advocacy for Bolshevism stemmed from his deep hatred of the Tsars, the royal family that had been ruling Russia for centuries. The bourgeoisie, or the ownership class, wanted Lenin dead because of his position, and he was forced to flee Russia time and again. But he always returned to lead the people of Russia out of the filth and corruption set in place by the Tsars. He was not completely aware of it, but he was just beginning a career that would place him among the most influential leaders of the 20th century, comparable to future President and Prime Minister Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. While this internal conflict was beginning, World War I was taking a brutal toll on the Russian armies. Hearing of the innumerable deaths, the peasants and other members of the lower class began to protest the Tsar's rule. Listening to their cry, soldiers also turned against their ruler and forced the Tsar's personal train to stop on his way home from the front, all the while crying out to him for food and drink. Left with no options, Nicholas abdicated, leaving the country in the hands of the newly formed provisional government headed up by Alexander Kerensky. Although it was change, the provisional government, made up of mostly Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries, soon became an intensely disliked institution among the people of Russia. This tumultuous feeling manifested itself in the insurrection of General Lav Kornilov, the supreme commander of the Russian army, along with troops loyal to him. The revolt was impeded by help of Bolsheviks and their armed militias, but the refusal of the provisionals to end the war with Germany was the final straw for the lower class. In February 1917, the Great October Revolution began with strikes and protests in Petrograd. The people voiced their beliefs in communism by taking the fight directly to Kerensky in the Winter Palace. In October of 1917, famously known as Red October, the Bolsheviks seized Petrograd and the palace, forcing Kerensky and the other provisionals to flee to Moscow. During the winter, several of Russia's territories seized this opportunity to break away from the empire, namely Estonia, Ukraine, and Finland. In March of 1918, the Bolsheviks officially changed their name to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This proved to the Russian population that there was one ruling party, and not two divided factions of the former Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Once the Bolsheviks have both Petrograd and Moscow firmly in their grasp, Lenin signs a peace treaty with Germany in December of 1917 to avoid war on two fronts and to appease the Russian populace. Turning his attention to the Menshevik-led White Army, Lenin appoints his second-in-command, Leon Trotsky, commander of the newly formed Red Army. Having also created an army of secret police called the Cheka, Lenin now puts them to work, finding and executing counter-revolutionaries and political opposition. He also gives the order for many skilled Tsarist army officers to be executed, destroying the most vital part of the army. While they do take orders from Lenin, the Chekas secretly assassinate the Tsar and his family, supposedly without Lenin's knowledge, although he later endorses the killings. While the fight between Reds and Whites continues, the Whites are being supported by foreign nations such as Britain, France, and the United States, who wish to prevent the spread of communism.
In Bolshevik time, they found that they had to control armies, they had to put in political people in each level of a military to make sure that they were operating in a way that the political system wanted them to operate.
However, even with this support, the White Army was slowly beaten into the ground by a combination of Trotsky's tactics and their own dividedness. Finally, after 3 long years of hardship and battle, the Red Army decisively defeats the Whites at Perekop, located in the Crimean Peninsula. With his government secure, Lenin now turns his attention to completely silencing his political enemies by the means of the now bloodthirsty Cheka, ruthlessly executing thousands of innocents accused of being counter-revolutionaries. In May of 1922, in the midst of his victory, Lenin suffers the first of 3 strokes that will eventually lead to his death. Soon after, the Soviet Union is officially created by uniting the countries of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the area of Transcaucasus. Lenin then suffers 2 more strokes and is de facto removed from power, thereby creating a struggle for power at the highest level of government. Finally, in January of 1924, Vladimir Lenin dies of unknown circumstance, believed to be a case of syphilis, but poisoning is another possibility. After all, his death paves the way for one of the most tyrannical and ruthless dictators the world has ever had the misfortune to meet, Joseph Stalin.